Welcome to the first installment of the Sierra Madre Playhouse Short Story Project. We're working on a better name. This first installment is The Set of Poe, written by George Ade in 1903. It is performed by Michael Hoag, Kodi Jackman, and Christian Lebano. And it was edited by Jean Marie Valeroy. I hope you have a great time. Do let us know what you think, and if you have any suggestions for short stories that you would like to see as part of the series, let us know that as well. Thanks for listening. The Set of Poe by George Ade. Waterby remarked to his wife,
I'm still tempted by that Set of Poe. I saw it in the window today, marked down to $15.
Yes?
said Mrs. Waterby, with a sudden gasp of emotion, it seemed to him.
Yes, I believe I'll have to get it.
I wouldn't if I were you, Alfred. You have so many books now.
I know I have, my dear, but I haven't any Set of Poe, and that's what I've been wanting for a long time. This edition I was telling you about is beautifully gotten up.
Oh, I wouldn't buy it, Alfred. It's so much money to spend for a few books.
Well, I know, but
And then he paused, for the lack of words to express his mortified surprise. Mr. Waterby had tried to be an indulgent husband. He took a selfish pleasure in giving and found it more blessed than receiving.
every salary day I turn over to Mrs. Waterby a fixed sum for household expenses. Added to this is an allowance for her spending money. I set aside a small amount for my personal expenses and deposit the remainder in the bank.
He flattered himself that he approximated the model husband. Mr. Waterby had no costly habits and no prevailing appetite for anything expensive. Like every other man, he had one or two hobbies, and one of his particular hobbies was
Edgar Allan Poe.
he believed that
Poe, of all American writers, was the one unmistakable genius. The word genius has been bandied around the country until it has come to be applied to a long-haired man out of work or a stout lady who writes poetry.
in the case of Poe, Mr. Waterby maintained that genius meant one who was not governed by the common mental processes, but
Who spoke from inspiration, his mind involuntarily taking superhuman flight into the realm of pure imagination.
or something of that sort. At any rate, Mr. Waterby liked Poe, and he wanted a set of Poe.
I allow myself not more than one luxury a year, and I am determined that this year the luxury should be a set of Poe.
Therefore, imagine the hurt to his feelings when his wife objected to his expending $15 for that which he coveted above anything else in the world. As he went to work that day, he reflected on Mrs. Waterby's conduct.
Does she not have her allowance of spending money? Do I ever find fault with her extravagance? Am I an unreasonable husband in asking that I be allowed to spend this small sum for that which would give me many hours of pleasure and which would belong to Mrs. Waterby as much to me?
He told himself that
Many a husband would have bought the books without consulting his wife, but I have deferred to my wife in all matters touching family finances.
and he said to himself, with a tincture of bitterness in his thoughts,
I probably have put myself into the attitude of a mere dependent.
or had she not forbidden him to buy a few books for himself?
Well, no, she had not forbidden him, but it amounted to the same thing.
She had declared that she was firmly opposed to the purchase of Poe. Mr. Waterby wondered if it were possible that he was just beginning to know his wife.
Is she a selfish woman at heart? Is she complacent and good-natured only while she is having her own way? Wouldn't she prove to be an entirely different sort of woman if I should do as many husbands do, spend my income on clubs and cigars and private amusements, and give her the pickings of small change?
Nothing in Mr. Waterby's experience as a married man had so wrenched his sensibilities and disturbed his faith as Mrs. Waterby's objection to the purchase of a set of Poe. There was but one way to account for it.
She wants all the money for herself, or else she wants me to put it in the bank so she could come into it after. But this was too monstrous.
However, Mrs. Waterby's conduct helped to give strength to Mr. Waterby's meanest suspicions. 2 or 3 days after the first conversation, she asked,
You didn't buy that set of Poe, did you, Alfred?
No, I didn't buy it.
He answered as coldly and with as much hauteur as possible. He hoped to hear her say,
Well, why don't you go and get it? I'm sure that you want it, and I'd like to see you buy something for yourself once in a while.
That would have shown the spirit of a loving and unselfish wife.
but she merely said,
That's right. Don't buy it.
and he was utterly unhappy, for he realized that he had married a woman who did not love him and who simply desired to use him as a pack horse for all household burdens. As soon as Mr. Waterby had learned the horrible truth about his wife, he began to recall,
Little episodes dating back years.
and now he pieced them together to convince himself that he was a deeply wronged person. Small at the time and almost unnoticed, they were now accumulating to prove that
Mrs. Waterby has no real anxiety for my happiness.
also Mr. Waterby began to observe her closely, and he believed that he found new evidences of her unworthiness.
For one thing, while I am in gloom over my discovery and harassed by doubts of what the future might reveal, she was content and even-tempered.
The holiday season approached, and Mr. Waterby had made a resolution. He decided that,
If she would not permit me to spend a little money on myself, I would not buy the customary Christmas present for her. Selfishness is a game at which two can play.
furthermore, he determined that if she asked him for any extra money for Christmas, he would say,
I'm sorry, my dear, but I can't spare any. I'm so hard up that I can't even afford to buy a few books that I've been wanting a long time. Don't you remember that you told me that I couldn't afford to buy that set of Poe?
Could anything be more biting as to sarcasm or more crushing as to logic? He rehearsed this speech and had it all ready for her as he pictured to himself her humiliation and surprise at discovering that,
I have some spirit, after all, and a considerable say-so whenever money was involved.
unfortunately for his plan, she did not ask for any extra spending money, and so he had to rely on the other mode of punishment.
I will withhold the expected Christmas present. In order that she might fully understand my purpose, I will give presents to both of the children.
It was a harsh measure, he admitted.
But perhaps it would teach her to have some consideration for the wishes of others.
It must be said that Mr. Waterby was not wholly proud of his revenge when he arose on Christmas morning. He felt that he had accomplished his purpose, and he told himself that his motives had been good and pure, but still he was not satisfied with himself. He went to the dining room, and there on the table in front of his plate was a long paper box containing 10 books, each marked
Poe.
It was the edition he had coveted.
What's this?
For his mind could not grasp in one moment the fact of his awful shame,
I should think you ought to know, Alfred.
said Mrs. Waterby, flushed and giggling like a schoolgirl.
Oh, it was you.
My goodness, you've had me so frightened. That day when you spoke of buying them and I told you not to, I was just sure that you suspected something. I bought them a week before that.
Yes, yes.
said Mr. Waterby, feeling the salt water in his eyes. At that moment he had the soul of a wretch being whipped at the stake.
I was determined not to ask you for any money to pay for your own presents. Do you know I had to save for you and the children out of my regular allowance? Why, last week I nearly starved you, and you never noticed it, as I was afraid you would.
No, I didn't notice it,
said Mr. Waterby brokenly, for he was confused and giddy.
This self-sacrificing angel. And I have bought no Christmas present for her.
It was a fearful situation, and he lied his way out of it.
How did you like your present?
Why, I haven't seen it yet.
You haven't? I told them to send it up yesterday.
The children were shouting and laughing over their gifts in the next room, and he felt it his duty to lie for their sake.
Well, don't tell me what it is. I'll wait until it comes.
I'll go after it.
He did go after it, although he had to drag a jeweler away from his home on Christmas Day and have him open his great safe.
The ring which I selected was beyond my means, it is true, but when a man has to buy back his self-respect, the price is never too high.